It was supposed to be a normal Saturday morning in Cedar Bluff Estates. The air was crisp, the sky was painted in soft streaks of orange and pink, and the quiet hum of sprinklers filled the neighborhood. My wife had just finished setting up coffee on the porch. We were expecting two very important guests, the county sheriff and a local judge. Both of them were close family friends. They had offered to stop by for breakfast after a long week of dealing with some very public HOA disputes in town. Our home had turned into a sort of safe haven for neighbors and law enforcement alike. It was a place where officials and residents could talk openly about the chaos brewing in the neighborhood. All of this tension was entirely thanks to our power-hungry HOA president, Nancy Caldwell. Nancy was the self-appointed queen of control. Her sense of entitlement was unmatched, and her need for domination over every detail of Cedar Bluff Estates had escalated into something close to tyranny. I had already dealt with her ridiculous antics before. She had screamed at kids for riding bikes too close to her mailbox and threatened elderly residents for leaving their trash cans out 5 minutes late. She had even once trespassed onto my private property just to measure the angle of my holiday lights. But this morning, Nancy Caldwell decided to take things much further than ever before. She parked her oversized SUV directly across my driveway, blocking me in completely. It happened just as the sheriff's vehicle was pulling around the corner. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. But then I saw her. Nancy was standing tall in the street with her arms crossed, a clipboard in hand, and a smug grin plastered across her face. She knew exactly what she was doing. She shouted across the cul-de-sac, her voice shrill enough to rattle windows. "You're not allowed to host meetings on your property without HOA approval. This is a clear violation. Until you submit the proper forms, nobody is going anywhere," she shrieked. Her SUV sat there like a barricade, angled aggressively across the driveway with the engine still running. Neighbors peeked through blinds and half-open doors, sensing the storm that was about to break. The sheriff's vehicle stopped, and out stepped Sheriff Mitchell, a towering, authoritative man. His calm presence usually diffused even the most heated disputes. He had barely closed his car door when Nancy marched toward him, her plastic clipboard raised like it was a deadly weapon. "Sheriff, you can't park here. This is private HOA business," she barked, her face already flushed with anger. Behind him, Judge Bennett stepped out of her own car, clearly bewildered by the scene. The judge had come expecting a quiet morning breakfast, not a full-blown neighborhood blockade. Nancy's eyes darted toward her, and then back to me. That was the exact moment it finally clicked. She hadn't expected them at all. She thought she was just going to intimidate me, fine me, and maybe embarrass me in front of the neighbors. But now, her carefully planned stunt was unraveling. With a county sheriff and a judge standing directly in front of her, her power trip was failing before it even began. "Ma'am, you're obstructing a driveway and creating a hazard," Sheriff Mitchell said firmly. But Nancy wasn't backing down. She took a step closer to him, jabbing her clipboard toward his chest. "No, you don't understand. I run this neighborhood. I make the rules here." She spun on her heel and pointed a manicured finger directly at me. "And he is violating all of them. Hosting secret meetings, bringing outsiders onto HOA property, undermining my authority." Judge Bennett's eyebrows arched in total disbelief. "Outsiders? Ma'am, this is a public street. And last I checked, you don't have the authority to enforce laws," the judge replied calmly. But Nancy was already spiraling. Her voice rose even higher, words tumbling out like sparks in dry grass. She accused me of plotting against her and accused the sheriff of conspiring with residents. She even accused the judge of being part of a smear campaign against HOA leadership. The neighbors were coming out now, drawn by the loud shouting. Some stood on porches, others whispered nervously. A few even pulled out their phones, recording as Nancy's tirade grew louder and much more chaotic. Her SUV continued to block the driveway. The sheriff calmly asked her to move it one more time. She dramatically dropped her keys into her purse and shouted, "This vehicle isn't moving until justice is served." But justice was already unfolding in ways she hadn't anticipated. Sheriff Mitchell called for a tow truck, his police radio crackling loudly as he relayed the obstruction. Nancy completely lost it. She lunged toward him, waving her clipboard like a sword. She screamed that she would file lawsuits, shut down the entire block, and have every resident fined into bankruptcy if they didn't back her up. Her words were venomous, but her eyes betrayed panic. She had massively miscalculated, and deep down, she finally knew it. When the tow truck arrived, the scene turned into pure chaos. Nancy stood directly in front of her oversized SUV. With her arms spread wide, she tried blocking the tow driver from attaching the heavy chains. She screamed that this was an illegal seizure and that she would have the sheriff's badge stripped. She even yelled that Judge Bennett would be disbarred. Her voice cracked with sheer desperation, but nobody was moving out of her way this time. The sheriff gave her 3 clear, distinct warnings. Each warning was louder and more commanding than the last. She stubbornly ignored them all. Finally, he signaled to his deputies, who had now arrived as backup. They stepped forward, calm but unshakable. That's when Nancy Caldwell made her final disastrous mistake. In a wild attempt to assert control, she pulled a canister of pepper spray from her purse and aimed it directly at Sheriff Mitchell. Gasps erupted from the surrounding crowd. Before she could even press down, a deputy swiftly disarmed her. The small can clattered loudly onto the hard pavement. Nancy shrieked and flailed wildly. The deputies restrained her firmly, and her clipboard finally slipped from her grip. The heavy sound of her SUV being chained to the tow truck filled the tense silence that followed. Neighbors cheered quietly. Pure relief washed over them as the once untouchable HOA president was led away in steel handcuffs. Judge Bennett shook her head in disbelief, muttering, "Unbelievable." Sheriff Mitchell turned to me, his expression a mixture of frustration and absolute relief. "You weren't kidding when you said this HOA situation was out of control," he said with a heavy sigh. As the tow truck hauled her SUV down the street, Nancy's voice still carried. It was muffled but defiant. She shouted threats of lawsuits, promises of revenge, and rants about neighborhood conspiracies. But her power was completely gone. Cedar Bluff Estates had seen too much. And the law had finally stepped in where HOA rules couldn't. That breakfast turned into a long, wonderful conversation. We talked about accountability, community, and the dangerous illusion of unchecked authority. The neighbors who had once been too scared to speak up now gathered happily on my front lawn. They were emboldened by what they had just witnessed. For the first time in years, the cul-de-sac felt truly united. Not under Nancy's iron fist, but in shared relief that her reign of chaos was ending. And as the sun rose higher, casting golden light on the scene of her ultimate downfall, one truth was clear. When blind entitlement meets real legal authority, there's only one way it ends, and it isn't pretty.